welcome to this afternoon's Mayoral Combined Authority meeting. It will not have slipped your notice that I am not the Mayor. I'm just going to be doing my impression of him for the purpose of this afternoon. Oliver has had a COVID exposure, as we're describing it this afternoon, so in the interest of all our health, is not able to join us this afternoon, so I'll be chairing the meeting today. Cabby, do we have any apologies?
Mayor, and also Councillor Terry Fox.
Thank you. So I've got some announcements from the Mayor. There are no formal announcements. However, Oliver would like to begin by taking a moment to acknowledge the passing of Jim Andrews, the long-serving former Deputy Leader of Barnsley Council, late last week. Jim had achieved so much for his community and had so much more to give. All our thoughts are with his late wife Sharon, Jim's family and those who knew him. An update on Doncaster Sheffield Airport. Since we last met, the MCA have received the devastating announcement from Peel Group that they were going to wind down the provision of what they called aviation services from the end of October. Since the announcement from Peel that they were entering into the review of DSA, the Combined Authority and colleagues in Doncaster Council have done everything they could to constructively and proactively find a path forward. They have identified market interest, brought potential investors to the table and offered them a deal to protect the jobs and livelihoods of DSA staff and give Peel the time and space to negotiate with new investors. The fact they chose to turn down the offer simply confirms what many of us suspected, that Peel were not serious about finding an alternative and safeguarding the future of DSA. Oliver remains steadfast in his commitment to an ambitious plan for Doncaster and South Yorkshire, and we will continue to fight Peel's decision until the last moment. In the meantime, our thoughts are with those directly affected by the closure of the airport, who will remain at the forefront of our efforts to find constructive solutions. And finally, I want to take the opportunity to recognise the work of Ruth Adams, our outgoing Deputy Chief Executive for the Mayoral Combined Authority. This will be Ruth's final MCA meeting in post. Over a decade of service, Ruth has been central to the creation of the MCA itself, delivering the strategies and systems, including our strategic economic plan, that will help the region to thrive. On behalf of the MCA and myself, Ruth, for all the help that you've given to me over the course of the last few years, let me share our thanks and wish her every success in her next steps. Just some final thoughts from Oliver before I finish. The challenges that we face as a region are daunting. We will hear today about some of the efforts the MCA are working to make progress on, tackling our region's faltering bus network, the cost of living crisis in South Yorkshire, and how we respond to the climate crisis. All of this is being inflamed by national political infighting and policy instability. But our work today also points the way to a better direction, the chance to agree new investments across the region, to take control of our tram network, and as a signal of our ambition for South Yorkshire, and showing there are things that we can do to address the biggest challenges of our time. Are there any other comments from anyone on the Mayor's statement? If not, I'll move forward to agenda item 3, urgent items. I'm not aware of any. Okay. Item 4 is items to be considered in the absence of press and public. There is one item that needs to be considered in the absence of press and public, a confidential programme approval at item 17, appendix 3. The webcast will be paused for any consideration of that, and members of the public and press will need to leave the room while the item is discussed later in the meeting. Agenda item 5 is voting rights for non-constituent members. We have no such issues on our agenda. 6 is declarations of interest by individual members in relation to any item of business on the agenda. I assume we have any usual locality-based declarations, but apart from that. Okay, thank you. 7 is reports from and questions by members. I'm not aware of any. 8 is receipt of petitions. As of the 17th of October, we received 2 petitions. The first one was presented in person at the Mayor's 100 Days event by Ms. Fatima Owen. Hello. The petition has 211 signatures. This petition is to stop the number 5 bus from being removed. This bus is the only bus that runs through the Wensley estate and a vital link to Firth Park and Sheffield City Centre for the elderly and disabled on the Wensley estate. Can I invite the petitioner to come forward? You've got up to 5 minutes to speak in relation to your petition. Yeah. Please.
Right. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Mayor and the members of the public and our community who supported this petition. I have handed over 211 signatures previously. Today I am here to share the reality of people who are suffering as a result of the bus cuts. The community and the people who have been impacted by the bus cuts are from community where they rely on the buses, which covers a wide geographical area. The number 5 bus covers Fair Park, Hindhouse Lane, Wensley State, Beige Hall, Air Marshall Road, Whiteways Road, Grimstone Road, Carwood, Beta Street, Ellesmere Road, through the city centre and down the moor. For example, these routes are paramounted to the emotional, psychological, and healthy well-being of vulnerable people reliant on the buses. For example, this route is not a flat service, and it covers a wide geographical areas. The number 5 bus passes through shops, GB, post office, chemist, and parks and libraries. All these public amenities assist with mitigating isolation and allows vulnerable people to be independent. In addition to giving vulnerable people a sense of ownership and accountability of meeting their own needs rather than being reliant on other or a home care which is in crisis. Vulnerable individuals are not only the elderly or those with health needs. This is everyone, young people who rely on number 5 bus for school, college, and shopping, given the chance around early and late night. Mobility and geographical area is not a flat service. The amenities are not in just one area or location. Vulnerable people need and want to have access local amenities which promote their well-being. For example, Mr. Harry Grantham is a vision impairment with several health-related issues. So, is others I have their letters to pass on today's meeting to explain the health and need of this bus route. Thank you very much for your time and to allow me to be present and bring my issues, and wish to hear from you with a verbal response. Please bring back our buses. Thank you. It's Fatima On.
Thank you for your petition. There you go, it goes quiet if I start speaking. Thank you for your petition. The Mayor's asked me to read out a reply to you that he's prepared, so I'll do that now. He says, thank you very much for handing in this petition and for bringing the concerns of the communities affected to my attention. I know the recent bus network cuts and PAL's announcements of their insolvency are a huge worry for communities and are putting at risk people's jobs and livelihoods, and they're making it impossible for people to travel to everyday appointments. I can absolutely assure you that following the closure of PAL's bus company in August, the team sought to intervene and protect as many of their services as was possible. They made contact with all the local bus operators to explore if they could run the services at risk, and in the case of Service 5, they received interest from Cawthorns, the bus company, in running that service. Cawthorns also expressed an interest in operating the service A1. However, they only have limited vehicle and driver resources available, so through discussion and negotiation with the MCA staff, agreed to run 4 trips on the service A1 and the remaining timetable on the service 5. This means that morning departures at 5 to 7 in the morning and 5 to 8 in the morning from Firth Park, as well as afternoon departures at 18 minutes past 3 and 28 minutes past 4, along with return trips from Moorfoot, no longer run on the service 5. However, all remaining timetable trips on the service remain in place, consistent with the previous timetable operated by PALS. However, the Mayor says he knows this isn't good enough. It was the best compromise achievable considering the limited resource available and best protects the needs of passengers on the Service 5, as well as continuing to provide important commuter links on the A1 to Sheffield Business Park. Right now we have a broken system that allows operators to simply walk away, leaving taxpayers to step in and prop up services so people can get to work, school, medical appointments and to see family and friends. That's why we're undertaking the assessment into whether we can franchise South Yorkshire's buses as a route to a long-term solution for our public transport network. In the meantime, we are coordinating work with local authorities and bus companies to put alternative services in place where possible. Thank you. We've also got a second petition which was passed to the Democratic Services team via Dr. Miller at the South Yorkshire Climate Alliance. The petition has 267 signatures calling on the Mayor of South Yorkshire to find funds to retrofit South Yorkshire homes in fuel poverty now. Investment in retrofit would reduce energy use, carbon emissions, reduce energy bills, provide warmer and healthier homes and create long-term local employment. The petition calls for creative action from the Mayor of South Yorkshire to find funding to deliver a comprehensive and well-planned retrofit programme to end fuel poverty. Do we have, is Mr Sully? I'm guessing you're not Mr Sully, but with somebody who can speak to the petition. If you're able to come forward, introduce yourself first.
Okay. Yes, I'm Joan Miller from the South Yorkshire Climate Alliance, so I'm presenting the petition which you've read out. And in choosing this petition, we just felt this proposal was, to be honest, a no-brainer. The first climate action that should be taken is powering down. So that's powering down domestic and commercial heating through retrofit. This means 1/3 less energy is used, so there are long-term climate gains, but there are also immediate social, economic, health and social justice gains. The social gains are lower bills for everyone, including business. The economic gains are £1 investment in, £3 out into the economy, and long-term jobs and a short-term business boost. Health, less illness, less admissions, less excess winter deaths, and the commonest cause of admission there is stroke, so it's really worth not having that. Social justice, less or ending fuel poverty. So you have happy, warm people. I think I've got 6 questions actually that relate. Where's the South Yorkshire group who are planning for this retrofit, including commissioning the urgently necessary training? Who's on this group and why can't the South Yorkshire Climate Alliance join it? How does civil society hold this group to account? Where is the Regional Investment Bank or its equivalent? Where is the South Yorkshire Green Municipal Bond or its equivalent? And where's the advice line for people who wish to retrofit their own homes or homes they rent out? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Miller. I've got the information that's provided to me by the Mayor, which I'll read out for you. If there are questions that you've put that haven't been answered as part of this, then I'll ask the team to respond to that in writing subsequently as well. Sorry, that's not ideal, but it's the best we can do in the circumstances. So thank you for bringing this petition to our attention. We will be speaking more directly about the devastating impact of the cost of living crisis on South Yorkshire communities later. The importance of warmer, healthier homes is clear now more than ever, even before we consider the positive effect retrofit will have in reducing our carbon emissions. The scale of the challenge should not be underestimated. Our housing stock is some of the least energy efficient in the country. Local authority colleagues have done a good job to date to improve energy performance in social and low-income housing for some of our most vulnerable citizens, but we know there is more to do. You rightly point out that improving our homes will give us multiple benefits, including tackling fuel poverty, creating warmer, healthier homes, creating local green quality jobs, supporting businesses to grow and creating a skilled workforce, reducing energy usage and dependence, and crucially cutting energy bills in the long term, and lastly but not to be forgotten, the much needed carbon reductions. Officers working across the MCA and constituent authorities are working together under the leadership of the Chief Executive of Barnsley Council on developing solutions to our retrofit needs across the themes of data acquisition, skills and business support, outreach and marketing, and crucially, for the request of your petition, finance. Only by tackling those themes in parallel will we be able to create a retrofit system that delivers both value and results. To date, support from central government has permitted only modest numbers of houses to have work undertaken, and although that support continues with the latest waves of programmes such as the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and the energy company obligations, this will not be at the scale we need. At a regional level, we do not have the funding necessary to deliver retrofit at scale. To target the 300,000 plus homes currently in fuel poverty would require billions of pounds of investment. We do have money with which we can demonstrate solutions and mechanisms that will allow us to bring in funds from the private sector, pension funds and institutional investors. The Mayor hopes this response assures you we're working on retrofit programmes and will continue to explore mechanisms to scale this up for the benefit of communities and businesses. As I say, we'll put your other questions to the team and get further information to you if we can do that. Thank you. Item 9 then on our agenda is public questions, and there's been none received in advance of the meeting. Item 10 is minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June. Are members content the minutes are an accurate record of the meeting? I'll take that as an agreement. Okay, thank you. Item 11 is the 23-24 budget and business planning development, which Gareth is going to talk to us about.
Thank you, Chair. This is a short report updating on budget preparation for the new financial year. This is the second such report that the board has received following an earlier report in July and following on 2 engagement sessions with the South Yorkshire Directors of Finance. Since the last reporting date, there has been a number of movements on the Transport Authority budget that I'll just touch on briefly. So we're now forecasting a further saving on our concessions budget of around £2.4 million, and that directly relates to forecast patronage assumptions. This saving is largely offset by inflationary pressures that will be rippling across the system, with which I'm sure many of you are familiar. In total, this means that we're now forecasting a deficit per year of around £6 million by 2025-26. So we need to think about resolutions to this budget deficit in the current planning cycle, and we'll be coming out to members in October or November to discuss saving options and potential impacts on the transport levy. Finally, the report also picks up on exceptional Treasury management performance. This performance is largely affected by the change in the Bank of England base rate and the levels of cash held on deposit. The report notes that we expect to make a surplus on our Treasury management of around £4 million this year, and a number of reports in this pack contain proposals on how that money could be used to good effect in the immediate term. So I'm happy to take any questions at that point, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Any comments or questions on the report? If not, we're happy to note the contents of that report. I'll take those as noted. Thank you, Gareth. Item 12 on our agenda then is the bus network update, which John's going to speak to.
Thank you, Chair. So this item relates both to Gareth's paper on finance, and it relates back to the first of the petitions. We've been through a very, very difficult last few weeks due to a number of reasons, due to long-term challenges facing the South Yorkshire bus market, due to a very late notice government decision to change the funding of that, compounded by a first bus decision not to take the money the government was offering. A combination of those factors meant that we had to respond in a very small number of weeks to the changes in the funding and the withdrawal of services. This paper updates where we got on that. We have in the MCA have committed all the resources we could to sustain bus services up to the end of July next year, given the priority of ensuring as much stability as possible in the bus market. However, the amount of money we had to use was constrained by first decision not to take funding, so that made it very difficult, and then secondly by lack of drivers across the bus network affecting all of the operators. The combination of those meant that there have been significant reductions in the mileage going forward from the start of October. round about 15% reduction in mileage across the region. We've tried to accommodate that as best as we can by trying to provide for alternative services, serving the routes, trying to ensure that the reductions were taken on frequencies, but nevertheless it has meant severe difficulties for many communities across South Yorkshire, particularly on the three southern districts, Sheffield, Rotherham and Doncaster. We have, as far as we can, therefore, achieved stability going out to the end of July. However, we have to note, as Gareth's paper brought out, that we are using reserves from the MSA to do so. That will have a limit in how far that can go out. We're also presented with considerable uncertainty from central government because their funding commitments expire at the end of March, and we have no idea what they're planning to do at that stage. We're also expecting driver shortages to continue, and there's potential risks that Barnsley, which has been relatively shielded from the current reductions, may be affected from March onwards. So it's a difficult time going forward. What we are trying to do to avoid a repeat of the short notice changes of the last few weeks is to try and develop as much analysis and evidence as possible about what we're buying in the market, what's at risk, and how can we more effectively replace that. We are looking at options for collaboratively developing driver training to try and address the driver shortages issues going forward, and we are making very clear to government that they cannot just repeat changes of policy with weeks to go and inflict consequent chaos on bus passengers in this region and others. So the combination of those hopefully will try and manage the challenges we face, but certainly we can be under no illusions it is going to be a difficult few months on bus.
Thank you, John. Comments or questions on the report? Steve?
Well, I think any hope of the government not changing its mind over a 2 or 3 week period has probably gone out the window, hasn't it? Given we've just changed the whole national economic policy within that time. I think the issue for me is we need to get a grip of what a sustainable service looks like, because we can't keep going on hand to mouth, month to month, just wondering what's going to happen. We've heard from members of the public today how important the buses are to them and the quality of their lives. The reality is it's likely that that sustainable position will be less than we've got now, because at the moment we're throwing everything at the buses we can to keep the services alive. But I hear nothing from government, particularly the new Chancellor, that says this is going to get any better. So I think in getting a sustainable service, we also need to understand where those key routes are that the public value most. That isn't to say we can provide all of them, because I'm sure we can't, but nonetheless have an understanding of that and have an understanding of what the network needs to look like going forward. Because it may well be we are providing services at the moment that are less valuable than others, and we need to understand where those are so we're maximising the outcomes from the money that we're investing in it. And now it won't, as I say, it won't please everybody, but if we can get it on a sustainable footing, then when times do improve or resources do become available, we can start to see how we can grow that network. Because for Barnsley, it's hugely important is the bus network, economically, socially, health, you name it, leisure-wise. People need the buses, which is one of the reasons Stagecoach have been able to keep going, because the ridership in Barnsley has actually been slightly better than it has elsewhere. But as you rightly say, that may not be sustainable beyond the next 6 months. So we do need a piece of work, I think, if we haven't already started to look at what sustainability looks like.
Thank you, Chair. I concur with what Steve said, but actually going back to Doncaster, we've got social isolation also coming through this, where there's people, and I'm talking about elderly people and disabled people, who've got to go at least half a mile, if not further, to get to a bus stop alone, should a bus come by. more importantly, we've got other areas within the borough, and people are not able to get to work now, and I quote Wheatley Hills as that. So I want a sustainable service that meets the demands of all. And where we've got alternative means of transport, we've got to ensure that we're not duplicating. And I'm not convinced there's none of that being thoroughly thought through at the moment. But what I would like to see is one, we put in one of these papers whereby we're wanting to cap bus services, but we're also talking about an increase. Well, my recommendation is that we hold on to that, because we know we've got services of isolation, and when elderly folk are being told within Doncaster, well, they can get Doncaster community transport, and I'll say for someone to go from Norton to Aston, per person it would be £2.50. That's before they can get on a regular bus service. So isolation's coming with that. So I would ask that we look for true sustainability, ensure that there's no duplication of services by other means, and three, we hold back on capping certain bus fare at this moment in time when we're predicting such a shortfall on our reserves over the time. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ros. I think the bus fare caps on later on the agenda.
Yeah.
So we'll come back to that point then, if that's okay with you. Probably just worth reiterating, I think, John, for the record, the scale of money that is coming in from the city region to make good the shortfall that Steve rightly refers to. So this is with the school bus service money on top, something like 120% increase on the usual tendering budget from the MCA, which I think demonstrates the commitment that we're all making to trying to keep buses on the road. But that does only take us through to the middle, arguably summer next year, and we are at exactly that point then of what is sustainable. Now, passenger numbers have still been rising in recent weeks. We hope that that buys us some time to get a more viable commercial network. But beyond that, the point is absolutely right, that actually we're going to be reliant on what can we continue to sustain. Unless the government does a further U-turn, at the minute I have no idea what they're going to do, but unless there's further movement from the government that gives us the money that we need. Buses don't run themselves, don't fill their own tanks with petrol, do they? After those comments, do you want to come back in, John? Yeah.
It's just to say that totally agree with the earlier comments that the key thing we can do, because as far as possible we need to try and be in control of our destiny, is to really get in, unpack what we're buying. Can we be smarter about how we do it to address the social needs that we've heard earlier in the petition and you've both made. So that's the key task for me and the team over the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. So with that, I think we're okay to agree the recommendations in that paper. Okay. That moves on then to item 13, which is the tram operating model paper relating to the end of the tram concession in 2024. And Pat's going to speak to this one.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is about the future of the tram operating model for South Yorkshire. The tram system is an important feature of South Yorkshire, providing a sustainable, environmentally friendly transport solution alongside other transport solutions that we need in South Yorkshire. Of late, the tram system has experienced a loss-making position, although recently the tram system was in a profitable position, but further suppression of demand has meant that at the moment it's operating at a loss-making position. Having considered the various different operating model options at our disposal, which is broadly private sector ownership or MCA public sector ownership of the tram system, and noting that the market would look for the MCA to take revenue risk and cost risk on the system, the recommended operating model solution for this is to take the system into public ownership via an arm's length wholly owned subsidiary. Having considered a number of other key factors and features of the tram system, the system is currently at the end of its economic life, and therefore an asset renewal program will take place starting as soon as practicable, but some funding has been secured for that asset renewal program, which will lead to some disruption to the tram system, and that disruption needs to be managed really seamlessly and agilely by the MCA bearing in mind that the MCA own the asset of the tram system. Other factors in that, having done market testing about the financial risk being carried by the MCA, and that would be transferred by the private sector to the MCA, which could lead to more complex contractual structures. The other key component part is that the current contract expires with Stagecoach Supertram Limited in March 2024, and there is a fairly complex set of mobilisation activities that need to be achieved in the run up to that, and that will take time and resource efforts. This is essentially a more straightforward contractual route that we can start mobilising as the MCA, and therefore it's paramount that we achieve a seamless transition upon expiry of that contract in March 2024. So therefore, we are putting forward a recommendation to the MCA board to take the position of, or authorise the MCA to establish an arm's length wholly owned subsidiary company to operate a tram system with effect from the 22nd of March 2024, but also to follow on recognising the sustainability challenges within the system, to follow up with further sustainability plans to make sure that the system is there for the longer term. So that is the recommendation I'm seeking to put to the board.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Any comments or questions? Steve?
Yeah, I mean, agree with the report and what we're trying to do, so don't have a problem with that. A couple of things I would mention though is, one, we have a bus service losing money, and then we have a tram service losing money. I know on some routes we are running those two things together. That makes no sense. There are parts of South Yorkshire we're just hearing without a service, and other parts with two modes of transport. We've got to have a look at that. That is not sustainable financially, nor is it right when we're making such cuts elsewhere. So one of the things we need to do in getting a grip of the tram is to make sure that that is sorted out. That's actually financial gain to us without any particular pain. It also potentially makes the tram a bit more sustainable than it currently is. So I think you know the message that is there within that. And equally, if we are investing in the tram system in future, we've got to make sure that there's a return on that investment. It's not just about the tram's very nice and we all like it, and we do. It's got to pay its way, because if it doesn't, then that loss making effectively impacts on the wider transport network, the buses. So whatever we're doing on the tram, I think we've got to be pretty hard-nosed about the business case on it and what we are getting back for it.
Thank you, Chair. I am known for making my voice known about the tram and the lack of availability for the people of the city of Doncaster. There is no tram, there is no tram train, and we've had massive cuts on the bus services. And you will see that we actually are one of the boroughs that have the least number of cars as a mode of transport also. And therefore, I would want to see equity in funding, because one thing I'm continually hearing from the residents of the borough is they feel that they are paying unfairly for a service which is given to other parts of South Yorkshire. So although the report actually says the modes of transport within South Yorkshire, let's be honest and be clear, these modes of transport do not go to the full stretch of the borough, and therefore I wait and see what comes forward, because I will not be wanting to put the people of Doncaster in any poor regard to others who's getting all the services and they feel they're getting none. And I think they've made themselves known with this latest round of bus cuts, and I'll refer back to that as well. When we said we consulted with the public, the public had no idea what areas was being cut, what services was going to be altered. So that's not really consultation when they don't know what they're talking about. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I suppose, Pat, from my point of view, this is in some ways just an extension of the earlier item on buses, isn't it? Which is the real challenge of commercial viability and therefore private operation of public transport, certainly in the world after COVID. So I don't see that there is a credible alternative to the proposal that's in front of us. But in the same way that we talk about buses and bus franchising, that doesn't mean there's more money in the system, and they don't run for free. People's wages don't pay themselves. So I agree with many of the comments that have been made, but I think this is the right thing for us to be doing at this moment in time, which continues to keep our options on the table for the future. With that, we agreed on recommendations. Thank you very much. That takes us then to item 14, which is the South Yorkshire Investment Zone status update. Sorry, and the status updates, given that it changes every few days. Andy's going to tell us about it.
Thanks, Chair. Both the Chair and Sir Steve have stolen my gag, I suppose. In the Chancellor's mini-budget, the government set out a plan for growth. There are still bits of that plan for growth remaining, as of 2:50 now, before the meeting started. And one of those bits that remains is the stated policy intent of the government to establish investment zones across the United Kingdom. Subsequent to the mini-budget, the Government Department for Levelling Up set out some more detailed guidance with an expectation, a request that areas, including MCAs and upper tier local authorities, that wanted to submit an expression of interest were able to do so, and the deadline for that was the 14th of October. So that's why this paper sort of falls out of a more regular cycle of meetings, and it's why you have a slightly strange recommendation in the paper, which is to effectively endorse our intention to submit something we've submitted. So it is no surprise to members that we have indeed submitted an expression of interest. We have not got any clear sense as to when we will hear back on the process, the timeline for reviewing that expression of interest. It may be at pace, or it may not be. So, of course, we'll be able to keep members updated when we know more. The paper, section 1.2, sets out some of the proposed benefits, advantages of having investment zone status. They are as we know them right now. And if those things change, then of course we'll come back and update board members appropriately. That's it from me.
You're not bad to say you needed a time machine to pull off the recommendation, Andy. Well done. Any comments or questions on investment zones in general, I guess, Steve?
Yeah. Welcome the report, and happy obviously to support the recommendations, although it's already gone in, but we're aware of that. Barnsley's part of this for Goldthorpe. We're happy to be part of this. What I would hope is, and this is not for here, it's for the government, but this idea could well be a levelling up tool if it is applied to the areas who need it most. My worry is if they apply this across the country, the same as they apply it to areas that have, in government quote, been left behind, it won't give the advantage that those left behind places have. Even worse would be the better off areas get it and the left behind places don't get it, which would just widen the gap that we've already got. So hopefully the government will recognise that. What we do have within the bid are 3 areas where we know the local authorities can deliver and deliver in the timescales that the government is talking about. So hopefully that will be respected, and the needs of this area to grow the economy, because the South Yorkshire economy is still too small. So there's an opportunity here to give that a boost, and I hope the government do it.
Thank you, Steve. If there's nothing further on that one, then we are supporting the expression of interest that went in. Seeing no dissent on that. So thank you, Andy. Item 15 then on our agenda is the Economy and Cost of Living report, which Gareth is going to speak to.
Thank you, Chair. So we know that the cost of living is having a profound impact on communities across South Yorkshire. Inflation running at around 10% on a number of core foodstuffs and other essential items. Interest rates starting to bite in terms of the cost of credit. So the Mayor has asked officers to work with local authority colleagues and stakeholders from across the region to come up with some tangible solutions in how we might help. This report doesn't detail the cost of living crisis, but does offer a number of solutions in what we might be able to do locally to complement what government is doing nationally. So there are a number of proposals that I'll just briefly touch on and that we'll ask members to make a decision on. So first of all, we're asking for authority to proceed with our shared prosperity activity ahead of formal government allocations. And this just reflects us cracking on with what we have already agreed is really essential activity. We'll start to put programs of activity and money into the places that most need it. So that costs us nothing. It's just us getting on with the job and moving ahead of a formal process. The second item asks for a reallocation of the budget surplus that I touched on earlier. So it talks about £4 million worth of Treasury management surplus, unexpected funding that comes without any conditions and is available for us to deploy entirely at our discretion. So John's paper recognised that we recommend that £2 million of that go towards protecting priority bus services. This report recommends that we reallocate the final £2 million of that surplus to a cost of living fighting fund. So again, that's just earmarking money at this stage. And using that money, we have two tangible proposals that we put before you today. So we're recommending putting £700,000 towards a bus and tram price cap. Now this comes ahead of a government programme that will run from January, but we think there is a need for that now. So putting this money into the system now will enable a price cap of £2 per single fare from November through to December, and that will run through to the end of March using the government money thereafter. So that is a tangible intervention in the immediate term. The paper's also recommending that we commit around £700,000 to a food security package. So from the engagement that we've had with officers and stakeholders across the region, food security keeps coming back as the one thing that people say that we should be really concerned about. But that recognises itself in different ways in different parts of the region. So the report asks for licence for the MCA to develop a region-wide proposal that individual local authorities could opt into if it fits with what they are doing locally, or we could use that money for other local interventions if it doesn't fit. But we think intervening around food security is really important, and right now we have the tools to allow us to do that. So I'll take any questions at that point, Chair.
Thank you, Gareth. Ross.
Thank you, Chair. It's great, and I really do endorse that we can cap some fares. However, you've got to have a bus to get on to have the fare capped. And therefore, when we've got people who've no mode of transport for such a long way, to cap the fares of the others that's gone on, and when you look at them, when you buy a day pass, sometimes the day pass is cheaper than buying two single fares. You'd always look and of it. So I would like to see us actually utilising this money to actually ensure that we properly service some other areas. When you're expecting one community to have to pay £2.50 to get just 2 miles into a village to get on public transport and wanting to cap fares at £2, that part I can't endorse. I'm sorry, I'd love to endorse it, but I can't endorse it because of the inequality that it's bringing about.
Okay, do you want to comment on that, John? Yeah.
I can absolutely see the point about it's all well and good introducing a fares cap, but what if you haven't actually got a bus? Your bus was taken out at the beginning of October. I think the problem we have is that we can't at the moment buy any more buses than the ones we're buying because of lack of drivers. So there isn't an option of using this money to buy back more services for passengers. On the other hand, I think this is an opportunity to to give a sort of kickstart, a stimulus to the recovery of the bus market at a key moment as patronage slowly comes back, as the cost of living crisis bites, and people may see the attractiveness of using public transport, and that may encourage them after the end of the scheme. So I think there is a bus opportunity here, and then of course there is the cost of living challenge facing the whole region, and this is one way of trying to help our fellow citizens at a really difficult moment.
Chair, may I come back?
You can.
I concur with trying to help all our residents of South Yorkshire. However, you will look and you'll see the greatest bus patronage is from the most deprived areas. We also read in one of the other papers within here, and I will quote the Tram because the Tram patronage has been going down year on year for many years. And therefore I will ask that you do a proper analysis of what we should and shouldn't be investing in so that we get the best transportation system we can for the whole of South Yorkshire, because at this moment in time I cannot put my hand on heart and say the people of Doncaster are getting a really good transportation service.
I suppose, are you all right if I comment and then come to you, Steve? Because I think we might, I need to take your advice a little bit on how to take this forward. So I suppose from my point of view, and being aware of the work that John and others have done through the Transport Board, the key thing, the number one thing at the top of our to-do list now is about how do you get people back on buses. So is that sustainability question? John's quite right about the availability of drivers, which has impacted my borough more than anywhere else in South Yorkshire. So if there was some way of buying more services, I think I might be in favour of buying more services. But at the moment, I'm looking for ways of getting people back on. And I do think, personal view, that by having a headline grabbing initiative that we can advertise, something that makes it cheaper for those people to use buses, I think that's a good idea and something that we ought to pursue. Conscious, therefore, that we've got a difference of opinion. So I'm looking to Steve for a view as to whether Steve, you think we should withdraw that particular part of the application, the paper, for some further discussion, or whether you feel confident we can take a decision from the meeting today.
I'm just looking on the numbers on this because we're only spending 1.4 out of the 2, which leaves 600,000 available. I'm just wondering if it helps to get this through, because I take Rosa's point. One, we can't purchase services that we can't purchase, and if that's a problem with drivers, then we've got to find a ways and means of getting drivers to come and work for our bus operators. So I'm wondering if there's a possibility of using, not all that, but some of that money as an with the operators to try and incentivise driver recruitment. In which case, if we can, there'll be some money available then to try and put some additional routes back on.
Chair, yeah, if I may, thanks, Steve. At the last discussion that we all have, we talked about driver training, if you recall, Ros, and what was being delivered in West Yorkshire. Mm-hmm. So it's just to make you aware of the fact that both John and Jim, our corporate director for skills, are now looking to see what we can take forward. So that issue is being picked up, Steve. However, in terms of funding, that could well be an option that we look at if there weren't skills funding available.
Well, I'm not just talking about skills, I'm talking, let's be frank, we're up recruitment, so people will come here rather than somewhere else, i.e. HGV training or working for West Yorkshire or working for somebody else. It's trying to make South Yorkshire more attractive. Now, I don't know what that will cost to do that, but I wouldn't have thought that were huge amounts. And if you can recruit another 10 drivers, potentially you can put, in simple terms, another 10 routes back on, which would solve some of Rosa's problems. So in agreeing the paper today, if we could, some of the money that's left there, earmark, I'm not picking any amount because I don't want to give people, false hopes, but nonetheless, we run not just a skills package, but an incentive package to try and get people to come and work in South Yorkshire, and therefore with more drivers, potentially there's more routes that could go back, and some of that money could then be used for those routes.
Can we say that we will take that away, and we will look at the commercial? In terms of that funding, there's not an issue. Gareth and I have just had that conversation. It depends on the commercial angles to that in a commercial. Yes. So.
But it seems to me Ros makes a fair point about you haven't got buses. Question is then, is there anything, and the problem is lack of drivers at the minute, is there anything else we can do to incentivise people to come and work and drive in South Yorkshire? If there is, potentially there's some money available for that, and then would that lead to some other routes to come back? Potentially then we could buy some more routes back. So it ain't just about skills, it's about come here, you know what I'm saying, and use some of that money towards that, if that would be satisfactory to Ross. So.
Chair, I want us to do the best for South Yorkshire, but I'm here also representing the city of Doncaster, and at this moment in time we've got people not able to get to work because of the way our buses are, and I quoted Weakley Hills as a prime example. I've also pointed out to yourselves what West Yorkshire did in order to get over the problems, although they've got other problems, and I very much realise that. I'm prepared to see it, but covering it for 2 months, I don't think that's going to incentivise and get people back on. It's a personal viewpoint that. So therefore, I'd love to see all fares very low in order to get people back on the buses. But we know consistently we've got a reduction in use, and some of it is because there's no sustainable transport that they can rely on. So I'd sooner it be invested in proper sustainable transport than doing a quick fix of 2 months.
Martin, can I get to comment on that?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So first of all, if a board decision is made today that we allocate the money to that endeavour, then that's what we will do. We've then got to find the mechanisms by which we're trying to achieve it.
With that, Chair, I can accept it, but it's not to that endeavour. I want to see actual proof, and I want to see monitoring to see how much we get people back on the buses, bearing in mind that we know there's a different work-life balance now, where more people use transport differently to what was done pre-pandemic as well. So I want proper analysis done, because unfortunately I don't believe we've got that information at this moment in time. I hope you can tell me I'm wrong.
We've definitely got bus patronage numbers, so we can tell you the headline numbers around how many people getting on buses, which is creeping back up. It is creeping, but moving in that direction. So we'll take Steve's view about needing to properly explore what we can do with the remaining money in that fund to help recruit more bus drivers to get more bus routes back up and running. And we'll ask for a paper to come back with some recommendations on that and more information around the patronage and the breakdown around what's happening on the network.
Chair, can I just ask, we look at to ensure that with no duplication,
yes,
because that's a real irksome thing with many of our residents.
Just to reassure if I can, so it's an absolutely fair challenge that at the moment, as someone else said earlier, we're living a bit hand to mouth, so we're sort of bolting on solutions, using a bit of sellotape to keep going forward, and that's all we can do at the moment. But you're absolutely right that we need a more thought through plan as we head towards the next point at which government funding may be withdrawn, so we can take a balanced view across bus, tram. We can also explore some of the alternative measures for more flexible transport to try and fill gaps, and that needs to be evidence-based. So that challenge is totally accepted, and that's a piece of work we're going to have to do over the next small number of months.
Could I just ask one? This is complete ignorance on my part. How many bus drivers do we have in South Yorkshire?
Complete ignorance on my part, yes.
Just be useful to try and get an understanding of the scale of that.
it's going to run into low hundreds. Because given the scale of the shortfall of them and the size of the network, yeah. Okay, all right. So with those amendments to the paper and the recommendations, I think those are understood by officers. We'll proceed on that basis. Okay, thank you. That takes us then to agenda item 16, which is the Education Skills Employability Board Programme update, which Ruth's going to speak to.
Thank you. So I'm sitting in for Jim on this paper. So this paper gives members an update on a few of the big issues that the Education Skills and Employability Board have been dealing with, and that are likely, some of them, to come back to a future meeting. The first one is the Multiply programme. So Multiply was announced at the same time as the Shared Prosperity Fund. It's a programme for adults that don't have a GCSE. We made our investment plan submission to DFE in June and have answered some clarification questions. And the status that Multiply is that at the minute we're preparing the procurement specification and working with the grant providers that are the same grant providers, local authority grant providers that we do on AEB, on business plans, so that we can start mobilising Multiply early in November. The second update is on the individual placement and support in primary care. As part of the devolution proposition, we had the randomised control trial that we ran through, commissioned by the Sheffield Clinical Commissioning Group, which was branded Working Win, which supported people with mild, moderate mental health or physical disabilities into employment. The pilot that was closely monitored as a health pilot, so the reason the CCG ran it was because of all the medical ethics, was closely monitored by the Department of Health, and we were offered an extension to that, which we took some while ago, that worked outside that health trial. The evidence shows that in that time we've supported over 4,000 residents of South Yorkshire and Bassetlaw to move back into paid employment or to sustain work because they have received support tailored to support their health issues. The DWP and the Department of Health and Social Care, recognising that this is an important now part of the offer, have extended a call to areas to put together another proposal for support. So we've submitted, as the paper says, a submission based on what we've done with Working Win, what we've learnt over the last 3 years. We are awaiting the outcome of that from the Department for Work and Pensions and Department of Health in October. We then, if we're successful, move into a 5-month implementation and design programme, and then we commence activity, and that will be a 3-year programme running from starting with the implementation phase in 2022, but running until the end of 2024. So fingers crossed that we get, with the positive numbers that we've achieved as part of Working Win, that is extended and continues to be something that we can offer in the city region. The reason it would then come to the MCA to procure and contract is because it's no longer a randomised controlled trial, so the medical ethics part is not a consideration. And the final update in this paper is to clarify and tighten up the definition for adult education budget of a grant provider, and to widen that scope to section 28 designated with a track record of delivery, which some areas did from the start, and to be able to get us that flexibility if there is a need that we need to procure through one of those grant providers that we're currently not doing. So they were the 3 updates, and seeking permission to tighten up that definition.
Thank you, Ruth. Comments or questions on those, Steve?
It's just the delivery and commissioning of Multiply, I think, that we get as much local intelligence into that to drive that, rather than it being the providers drive that. No disrespect to the providers. So maybe commissioning that through the local authorities in their own areas. Clearly the providers are the providers, but what I'm anxious to do, and I'm sure colleagues in other areas will be to make sure that what we need in Barnsley is being commissioned appropriately for us in Barnsley. So it's doing that through the local authorities where that's possible.
Okay, I can see Ruth nodding, so good. there's nothing further on that. We've got the recommendations around multiply working week. Just to say on working week, because that takes us back a bit, Ruth. It's been a great scheme for my residents. A number of residents in my ward who benefited directly from that. So from those early tentative discussions of how's it going to work and randomised trials and why is it health led and all those sorts of things, which confused us back in the day. It's been a really good scheme, so really important piece of work. And around the definition on AEB as well. So if we agreed on those, that's great. Thank you. With members' permission, I'm going to defer the programme approvals at item 17 to the end because there's some restricted paper, so we'll just pick it back up again at the end. That takes us on then to item 18, the appointment of the independent ASRC member, and Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. The MCA's constitution requires that its Audit Standards and Risk Committee includes independent member support. One of those independent members came to the end of their term recently, and the MCA has been out to recruit for a new member. I sat on a recruitment panel with the Audit and Scrutiny Chair, Audit and Standards Chair, and this paper is recommending that we appoint David Phillips to that position. Dave is former district auditor, has worked across the patch within local government, the NHS and other bodies, is South Yorkshire based, and I think this is a good appointment. So I recommend it to the board.
Thank you, Gareth. I'm assuming that's okay with everybody. Good. And then item 19 on our agenda is the Delegated Authority Report. Anything to say on that, Martin?
Thank you, Chair. Simply to take the report as read, it's the normal report that comes to to board and maintains a schedule as attached of all the decisions that have run since July 20 through to September 22. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions on Martin's report? Okay, if not, we note those decisions. Thank you. In returning to item 17, I'm looking for some guidance from officers. Do we want to take that whole item in closed session, or do we want to take the... I think so.
No.
Okay, thank you. So we'll bring the public section of the meeting to a close, and then we'll reopen in closed session for that last final item. Thank you all very much.